Ripple has been working with the Federal Reserve here in the United States since 2014. As Ripple gets their national bank charter, you will see XRP and RLUSD integrated into all U.S. Federal Reserve payment systems. We're talking about trillions of dollars per day. I'm going to lay out all the research, everything that you need to know. I put it all together here. This is going to be an incredible video. Make sure that you stick through the whole thing. And if you get any value from this content, please hit like and leave a comment below. I really appreciate it. Let's start here. Now, Smokedog has put in a lot of time and effort to post this content, so I want to highlight his channel. If you're interested in following XRP or crypto content on X, Smokedog is probably a very good source that you guys can go ahead and take a look at. But here is the first video. Ripple US Faster Payments Council. Ripple's Pat the Internet of Value is coming. Hello everyone, I'm Pat Thelen. I'm the Vice President of Global Account Management at Ripple. We truly believe that there is an Internet of Value coming. Much like the Internet provided with communications and email in the 90s and through the beginning of the millennium, today the payment system is advancing. And unlike a lot of the other crypto players in Ripple space, we truly believe that the revolution is going to occur from within. So the ecosystem that the US Faster Payments Council has put together will be those players that will make sure we advance the industry. The working groups that are coming out. It's the Crossbar, the QR, the directory model. These are really opportunities to take that user experience, the interoperability that has been designed in the other initiatives, and really apply it to real-world problems. Many countries have leapfrogged the US in real-time payments. So this is a real opportunity for us to leverage a body like this. Field is set, and you can either sit on the sidelines or suit up with US Faster Payments Council and change the game. I thought that was a very good, well-edited clip there. Ripple and the Federal Reserve joined forces back in 2014. It's been 12 years now. It's crazy. To help redesign the infrastructure for the global financial system, and here is the minutes from 2014. As you can see here, January, February, March 24th. And here's what was discussed. Ripple's there, future clearing. Ripple Labs National Infrastructure, US Federal Reserve. Interesting that Ripple has been in the meetings from day one here with their infrastructure. Ripple and the Federal Reserve previously collaborated to date on domestic payment systems, and saying the Federal Reserve and the Saudi Arabia Monetary Authority had collaboration with Ripple connected to domestic payments updating. The rise of XRP's prices also contributed to attracting the attention of the financial institutions. As one of the informant put it, in late 2017, Ripple was worth more than Hold On. So, Ripple was worth more than all but maybe 20 banks on the planet. And that made the phone ring. That's an interesting comment there. Remember the Federal Reserve David and Delfado confirmed that Ripple's protocol can coexist in the US payment system. Let me play this. David, fantastic presentation. Thank you. I'm one of the fellows who raised his hand when you asked who uses Ripple, Joe and myself. And I just want to say, I'm very happy to see that someone at the same Fed respects it at the very least. And I'm sure that from all the good things you said about it. Really quickly, this is Waller. This is one of Trump's possible new Fed chairs. This guy right here. Excuse me. Let me get back to this. People in this room would like to hear more. You mentioned that you foresee a peer-to-peer currency agnostic payment clearance system such as Ripple coexisting with institutions such as central banks in the United States. And my question is, how are we going to see that happen? What is it going to take? So, thank you very much. And all the nice things I said about Ripple, everybody knows to short it. He's joking. Well, how do I see it? I mean, like you said, Ripple is a currency-agnostic platform. It really doesn't care too much about creating and managing its money supply, although it does have its native money supply. So, it's doing the way I exposited the idea, Ripple is handling the processing of payments for many of the world's unbanked people. Okay? and that the Fed is one institution that's providing a type of currency that people could use as payment using the Ripple protocol. But there may be other currencies. There could be Bitcoin. There could be the yen. So I see room for coexistence. I see it today. I don't see any reason to doubt why it might not continue in the future. Listen, they cannot use Bitcoin for bank-to-bank payments. Bitcoin doesn't have the KYC, the AML, the compliance built into it. It's also a lot more expensive, and it's a lot slower. And when you're a bank and you're doing millions of transactions a day, you want to rely on a network that is cheap, efficient, secure, and compliant. And that is why XRP and Ripple tick all of those specific boxes. All right. Remember, the Federal Reserve can integrate with Ripple. Regulatory bodies like the Federal Reserve continue to set and enforce regulatory standards. Messaging standards like SWIFT can easily be integrated into Ripple as well. And we've seen that over the years. And just more information backing up in 2017. Ripple is the only distributed technology company of the U.S. Federal Reserve Faster Payments Task Force. It's interesting back then, Ripple really was the only player in the game. Ethereum kind of wasn't even out yet at this point, right? 2015 plus, that was built outside of the United States. And so, Ripple has been, like I said, in these meetings from day one with some of the biggest banks in the world. Look at this. You got Goldman Sachs, you got JP Morgan, Citi, Barclays, BBVA's, Compass, Morgan, Stanley, Visa, MasterCard, NASA. We've seen a lot of cool information recently about MasterCard and Ripple working together, and I think we're going to start to see more and more updates on that here in 26. I'm really looking forward to that. XRP is set to operate under federal oversight as Ripple moves towards OCC Trust National Bank. Several major crypto firms, including Ripple Circle, BitCo, and Fidelity Digital Assets and Paxos, have received conditional approval from U.S. regulators to operate federally regulated national trust banks. The Office of Comptroller of Currency announced on Fridays that it is granted conditional approval of the creation of Ripple National Trust Bank and the entity affiliated with Ripple Labs, the company closely associated with the XRP ledger. If finalized, these limited-purpose bank charters would allow crypto firms to custody client assets under federal oversight. Also, this would give... So, right now, Ripple has these partners, right? So, you have the Federal Reserve, and then you have, Bank of America. You have JP Morgan. You have all of these banks that are connected directly with Federal Reserve. And so, Ripple's kind of been on the outside connected to those banks that are connected to the Fed. Now, Ripple, instead of kind of being on the outside, they will be side by side with those banks, and they'll have direct integration with the Federal Reserve. And so, that's XRP and RLUSD. You have RLUSD sitting at the Fed, and so that could really benefit Ripple in a large way. When we're talking about stablecoin usage for financial institutions and companies alike, having reserves directly at the Federal Reserve is something that most crypto companies will never be able to say that they have. And so, that would put Ripple in a league of its own. You also look at licensing globally. Ripple has one of the most operational, forward-thinking license for crypto and payments globally. They lead the way. The Circle and Coinbase are the two companies that are kind of closing in on Ripple. But Ripple getting that EMI license in the UK, that's a big deal. You look at what's going on in Singapore. Ripple has all the licensing it needs there. Ripple was in Luxembourg getting all their approvals to operate in the EU. Of course, down in Japan, here in the United States, Canada, South America, no matter where Ripple is, they have the licensings that they need to do business. And as the days and months move forward, I'd expect to see more announcements from that. This is my speculation here, I think Ripple could set up banks in other places of the world. I wouldn't bet that Ripple's team has not already brought this up, or there has been maybe plans pushed forward that are just not announced yet. I'm just thinking, if Ripple really wants to become like an IMF-type situation, the lender of last resort, they would want to be set up globally and have these institutions, and that's really when they can become a global power. And so Smoke Dog says, why does the world need third-party bridge currency? Answered by the BIS below. Let's play this. With all that in mind, how do we deal with this issue of exchange rates and interoperability? How do we get these digital currencies to really just talk to each other? Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when we talk about interoperability, we can see it at least in three different levels. So the first level is how we manage domestic interoperability. So how we generate this digital currency solution and make this speak with the other things that are out there in a little bit, in the idea of generating a platform so that everyone can connect to that platform and take advantage of a huge. Okay, so the clip is sped up. If I slow it down, it just sounds weird. So if it's going a little too fast for you, you can slow it down on YouTube to make it a little bit better, but I'm just going to have to play it in its original form here. Network externalities that we can get out of there. The second level is how do we manage cross-border transactions, even within the same currency, and that presents a certain level of challenges there. But when we talk about cross-currency and cross-border, then we face a completely difficult and different environment, and we can see three dimensions here. One is the technical dimension. And so how we manage to get a system that speaks in a certain cryptographic language to speak with another that speaks another slightly different language. So that is one level of complexity. We need to get the technologies to speak to each other. The messaging element is fundamental. The second dimension, which is much more complicated to solve. So that one, the first one, was the easy one. Okay? And there is a lot of money that is being put in terms of trying to solve this technical issues of interoperability. Now the second one is more complicated. It has to do with liquidity. So imagine that you have a pair of currencies for which there is not a complementary demand. You need to go and search for a third-party currency in order to make this settlement actually happens. And this really complicates things. So we need to put pieces of technology that can make more efficiency this use of liquidity so that more transactions can be settled. The third dimension, which is even more difficult than the previous one, is how do we manage to get homogeneity in terms of the policy requirements on different countries. And this becomes even more complicated when we think about, for example, AML-CFT and principles-based policies, and when we think about risk-based policies. We can code things that are very clearly stated, but when we're talking about principles-based regulation, this thing becomes really complicated, especially in an environment, as Tom said, in which 110 nations might have 110 different ways of looking at this. So we need work in these three dimensions: technology, liquidity, and also, and more importantly, probably in the policy side of things. Think about AML-CFT, but also think about privacy. Different countries have very different views on this. All right. And so Ripple and the developers on the XRP ledger are building out this whole privacy layer that's going to be very important. You know who he's sitting next to here, right? You know this guy that's sitting next to him right here. This is the lead innovation officer at Swift. He's the one that openly kind of goes after Ripple and XRP on X here. But what he said here is really important, right? How do you get all of these different countries and jurisdictions to have the same rules? And that really comes from like the G20 or G30 and maybe the UN. It's kind of a stretch to talk about the UN, but you really need to have all of these countries having similar regulations so that value can move seamlessly across borders. And we don't have 110 different, 10 different policies and regulations globally. It needs to be able to, every country should be able to have a few things that really are unique for their country, and that's really important, but you also need to make sure that money can move across and you don't silo your country out from the rest of the world as they move forward with this technology. Now, a Federal Reserve master account is something that is really important here, and I wanted to highlight how important this is. A Federal Reserve master account is essentially a settlement account at the Reserve Bank, and lets an eligible depositor or institution hold balances directly at the Fed and plug into FedWire, AC, and other Fed payment services in central bank money. Okay, so there are trillions of dollars that get processed every single day through the Federal Reserve here in the United States. And this would directly plug into XRP and RLUSD into those specific systems, right? It doesn't get any more connected to what Ripple's trying to achieve here. Ripple has multiple documented touchpoints with the Federal Reserve around payments modernization, but there's no public evidence that Ripple or XRP and RLUSD currently has a Fed master account, right? So that's what they're trying to get to. A master account is the official record of a financial rights and obligations between an account holder and its Federal Reserve Bank, where opening, intraday, and closing balances are determined. All credits and debits from the Federal Reserve Services Fed wire a post to the single account, which is how institutions settle with each other at the end of central bank money. One eligible depository institution example is banks and certain federally supervised entities could obtain a master account and its gateway for direct access. The Fed's payment systems lower settlement risk and intraday liquidity and credit from the Fed, known Fed-Ripple interactions. Ripple participated in the Federal Reserve Faster Payments academic work on blockchain, DIS disruption in payments notes that the Federal Reserve and other central banks had collaborations with Ripple related to domestic payment systems, highlighting Ripple's role in the industry's experimentation. Public material from the Fed's own DT case study emphasizes that distributed ledger networks can be implemented relatively quickly using cloud infrastructure and available tooling, which is the passage being calculated in screenshots. But this study is generic and does not endorse or the name Ripple or XRP task forces and integration timeline. We talked a little bit about this. The Fed Faster Payments Program documentation explains that central bank convened a task force, the Faster Payments and Secure Payments, and a steering committee with members drawn from banks, non-banks, technology firms, and others. And those materials describe an open multi-provider ecosystem where the Fed does not itself guarantee adoption of any one solution. An industry commentary about those task force notes that regulatory bodies such as the Federal Reserve would continue to set and enforce rules, while private networks, including Ripple solutions, could potentially interoperate through common messaging standards like ISO 2022. Now, the world did Ripple a favor here by SWIFT, forcing all of these financial institutions to upgrade its financial messaging to ISO. This does allow banks to all be currently using this new messaging standard. And if banks do not upgrade, right, the end date here was November 2025. If banks do not upgrade, they could be kicked out of the SWIFT system, heavily fined. And so everybody is forced to adopt this new standard. And of course, remember, it is not the cryptocurrencies that are ISO compliant. It is the payment networks, like Ripple, that is ISO compliant. And then you can use XRP through that. All right? And then there's some other stuff here. In late 2025, the Officer Control Their Currency granted Ripple conditional approval with the Ripple National Trust Bank. The charter is designed so that the bank will custody the reserves backing Ripple's US dollar stablecoin RLUSD, placing those reserves under federal and New York State regulatory oversight. It's already under New York State regulatory oversight. Ripple did wait for the New York Department of Financial Services to approve RLUSD. And this is why I believe Ripple does kind of have more skin in the game here. Can get this bank up and running a lot sooner than normally. This usually takes about 12 to 18 months to get a bank set up because Ripple has a lot of these connections already. They could probably do it in 2026, so I expect mid to late 2026. You'll see this bank going live once the OC finally approves it. All right. And then, of course, the Federal Reserve has put out a ton of information on DT. DT networks can be implemented relatively quickly by cloud infrastructure providers. The ability to implement the networks quickly speaks to the ease in which a variety of organizations can build a simple DT platform. Now, if you look at the experience and the people working at Ripple, it is just incredible. I've said this time and time again. Ripple has the ability to go out and bring in the most talented people from all over the world, especially here in the United States. In the financial services, you got people from JP Morgan Citi, Merrill Lynch, BlackRock CK, Visa, Pfizer, PayPal, and Prosper. Technology, you got Google, Apple, Yahoo, Bloomberg, and NASA. And of course, regulation, you have people from the Federal Reserve, SEC, DTCC, NSA, and Treasury. It really is an all-star team of incredible people, all with one goal of pushing forward with the new digital revolution in technology using XRP, RLUSD, and of course, Ripple's tech stack. All right. Market trends. Driving CBDC interest. Let me play this. This is another clip connecting all of this. Others was like the rise of other CBDC. So I do work in the US. We work with the Fed and we work with the academic, a number of universities that also work with the Fed, and the geopolitical impact of CBDCs is one of the topics that we've been working on. And, when China announced the digital yuan, that suddenly made the US Fed wake up and go, oh, hang on a minute, this is scary because, the dollar is still the primary currency for global trade reserve currency. And, if the digital yuan becomes widely used outside of China, that could be a threat to the dollar. That could be a threat to the dollar. So the Fed has to be very careful here, right? It seems like they don't want to push forward with the CBDC, retail CBDC, which I totally understand. People are worried about tracking and all of these different things, and I get that. But having a wholesale CBDC between the Federal Reserve and banks is probably the smartest way to go here. So, it'll be interesting to see how the Fed plays this. They know that other countries like China are expanding their CBDC usage, and you have to worry about, is de-dollarization going to continue to spiral out of control here if other currencies are used for oil trade and all of these different things. And so here is the same gentleman we played in an earlier clip. David Dotto confirmed that clearing and settlement at the Fed can be delegated to a third party like Ripple. So it's interesting to hear people at the Federal Reserve or who used to work at the Federal Reserve basically telling you that Ripple's technology can be integrated directly to the Fed and it can work beautifully. That is, people say, how can you trust, the Fed to do the bookkeeping? I mean, like I said, my response is you don't expect the Fed to kind of steal your money. I mean, if the Fed can print all the money it wants, it's not going to mess around with your bookkeeping. So, we have this big spreadsheet, the blockchain if you want, but it's just managed by the Fed. And it's very cheap, much cheaper than Bitcoin, if you're willing to delegate the responsibility to a third party. But then the downsides to all of that, of course, is you'd actually suppose you didn't want the Fed to be responsible for processing the payments. I mean, suppose, the Fed will likely impose some KYC restrictions on some purchases. They might not process some purchases that you might want to undertake. And so it was at that point that I said, well, we could, if we wanted to, extend the concept one step further. I'm not saying that this is ever going to happen, but just conceptually, you could imagine not Fed wired for all, but kind of like a Fed coin where what the Fed would do is actually just issue these, Bitcoin-like objects, and they would enforce a par exchange rate with the US dollar. That would eliminate the exchange rate volatility, but they could delegate the clearing of these payments to some third party, some sort of Ripple L-like protocol, or possibly even Bitcoin. I mean, we could delegate the responsibility of processing these electronic, Fed coin payments to the miners. And the idea there would be, that's never going to happen, in my personal opinion. When you have miners that are getting rewards and processing payments, what if a payment does go to a sanctioned country or something like that? There's no control there. I don't think the Fed goes this way. But when I hear this, what I'm thinking is if you combine all of the stuff that I just went over, Ripple getting this Fed Master account, getting their national bank trust set up, What if Ripple itself is able to build a stable coin for the United States to use, and those reserves are directly held at the Federal Reserve through Ripple's technology? I think that's even a possibility. If let's say they don't want to use RLUSD as US's digital dollar, maybe Ripple's the reason Ripple's going through all of these pieces is because there's a larger thing at play here in the background, where the United States launches a digital dollar through Ripple and at the Fed. I don't know. This is speculation. I'm just trying to put all these pieces together and see where it could lead, obviously. But I wouldn't root against these people. There's obviously a plan here that we don't know, everything that's happening. And of course, the team at Ripple is trying to expand their technology as well as offer the US, who they've been working with since 2014, newer technology to help them compete at scale globally. All right. Few are aware that the connections that Ripple has made in recent years, they have connections all over the world directly or indirectly. No other company has. Ripple will be a part of the Federal Reserve, which is why they have applied for a Fed Master account. So you just take a look at all of these things put together, and you start to wonder, what is the plan going forward here, and how integrated will XRP and RLUSD be to the US Federal Reserve and the US payment systems? That's my best shot and opportunity to put all the information together. Guys, if you got value, please like, share. Very few, I don't know how many of you, usually people go like 6 or 7 minutes and then they kind of go do something else. But if you made it to the end, please like the content. I know that you guys probably watch everything every minute, and I really appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. All right, I'll see you next time. I hope you learned something. Aloha.